Good afternoon, Psych 343. I'm here to introduce you to a modality of psychotherapy called psychodrama. Psychodrama is a form of therapy that uses acting with other individuals as a means to explore a client's real-life conflicts and inner emotions. The client models a certain role that has relevance to the issue that they're trying to solve. This is meant to give a new perspective and richer insight into potential solutions to the client's problems. This is a method that is based on the value of spontaneity and creativity being crucial for combating negative emotions. Psychodrama emerged in 1921 by Jacob Moreno, a Romanian-American psychotherapist, on none other than April Fool's Day. Moreno began his experiments in 1911 on children, and as his modality was born in 1921, he transitioned to working with adults. His work moved to New York City and was noticed by the American Psychiatric Association, prompting him to open the first psychodrama theater, which then moved into hospitals, and this allowed him to create the American Association of Group Psychotherapy and Psychodrama. The spontaneity of the theater was meant to deconstruct one's defenses, and something monotonous like sitting and evaluating thoughts was not a sufficient process for Moreno. The modality has been reinterpreted and reintegrated in a multitude of ways over the last century, and its true concrete process is still debatable. Perhaps this was intentional to further encourage those facets of creativity and spontaneity. I'm going to turn you over to the experts.
So psychodrama, the humanistic method, is a directed modality working with groups and individuals. Focusing interpersonally and utilizing flexible action-based approaches, it features activities and experiential-based problem solving.
The process of change for this therapy involves a three-step process that follows the psychodramatic spiral based on Goldman and Morrison. The individual comes in with the presenting problem, and through roleplay and enactment, the scenes get deeper and deeper into their childhood and past. Doing so leads to the first step of this process called catharsis. This is the time in which the client releases their emotions relating to the presenting problem and lets go of the tension that has been built up for so long. After this purifying moment, the client experiences integration, when they learn about different techniques and ways to handle these general problems. The last step is called role training, and this is when the client incorporates what they learned into their own issues to find the most optimal outcome by role-playing the present scenario with others.
And a key aspect of making this successful is through recognizing that each individual and group have unique strengths. Although it's recognized in this therapy that the client is already capable of healing, it's also acquirable and trainable, which means the therapist functions through direction and assistance to attempt to discover and promote the autonomous healing center. In other words, the client and therapist are both mutually responsible for the relationship, but the power dynamic leans towards the therapist, as they are considered the leader or director of the therapy. Another job of the therapist is to impart knowledge they have on the stages of development and direct the client through sharing this information. The therapist needs to be validating of the effects of hardship, also viewing it as a path to positive change. It is also important for the therapist to be doing the following: taking the client's goals with seriousness while also allowing room for infinite potential of growth, working in collaboration, bringing recognition to the tools present in every scenario, and finally, there is an emphasis placed on nurturing a caring relationship with the client.
Especially because the clients are there to be able to find personal identity, which brings us to the first stage of Moreno's developmental process called double.
And psychodrama assumes that the causes of psychopathology occur early on in life after sustaining a past of misattunement with primary caregivers. If identity is not found in the doubling stage, there is a lack of trust in aspects outside the self and a lack of sense of safety. The development of the self is stunted where there is no internalized sense of self, or the development of the autonomous ego doesn't occur. This can lead to feelings of emptiness.
To treat this, one can use the technique of doubling, which refers to role-playing a scenario or problem while having someone stand behind or beside the client. That person is the client's double and speaks for their inner voice. The goal of doubling is for the double to go beneath the surface and assume what the underlying issue may be. This helps the client obtain trust and identity and speak for themselves whether the double is right or wrong in what they assumed. Once personal identity is found through this technique, the client begins to recognize themselves more authentically, which is called the mirror stage of Moreno's developmental process.
This stage can go wrong when there is a constant observation of the self from a judgmental viewpoint and causes things like codependency, because there is a lack of separation between the self and other, which can cause someone to attach themselves to someone or something before they are able to separate. This happens and leads to deep-rooted shame.
The technique of role-playing can be used to assist with this stage or any other stage as well, in which the client and actors remain in their own identity for the entirety of a scenario and work through the scene together. Auxiliary ego is what follows the mirror stage, where one finds where they fit and where they belong. Once proper care of the auxiliary ego stage has been achieved, the last stage that occurs is role reversal, which defines the moment in which a person recognizes others not only as being separate from themselves, but also being individuals on their own and respecting that aspect.
And role reversal goes wrong when others attempt to see from another's perspective without an already established sense of self, where one abandons the self and falls into codependency.
In which the role reversal technique may help. Within this technique, similar to role-playing, the client enacts scenes with others where they may begin by portraying themselves, but later on the roles switch and the client must play somebody else's role. This allows the client to explore different ways to problem solve, think, and behave, and curate the ability to recognize how different people respond to similar situations.
Thank you to our researchers. Now passing it on to Johan, a success story of psychodrama.
Now, at the time of recording, I was sick, so I will be using this very handsome character to represent me. Optimal development while undergoing psychodramatic therapy often entails a positive change on one's self-emotional regulation. Thanks to the tools psychodrama provides, such as perspective, expression, communication, and reflection, these help with prevention of using maladaptive strategies when faced with stressors. In one study among adolescents, those who participated in psychodramatic therapy reported afterwards an increased amount of emotional regulation and a lower reported suppression of oneself in comparison to self-reports prior to therapy. Participants were asked 3 months later in a follow-up test, and it was found their self-wellness score still remained higher than before exposure to the therapy. Overall, there was a reported increase in empathy, increased self-confidence, hopefulness, and social skills. These positive developments were also common among prisoners who had also undergone psychodramatic therapy, and their post-treatment also reported improved confidence, self-control, development of adaptive coping mechanisms to aggression, like empathy and perspective. Though therapy tends to focus on developing one's empathy and perspective, Western culture tends to focus more on the self in terms of autonomy and individualism, while other cultures, such as the East Asian cultures, their self pertains to the value of family, self-reliance, social/family hierarchy. While these cultural differences existed, in one study comparing the outcomes of psychodrama therapy between Western and Chinese culture, non-clinical studies in China, it was shown that psychodrama therapy outcomes resulted in positive outcomes similar to those who underwent psychodrama in Western-based studies. Results showed that among those with self-reported depression and anxiety, there was a similar effectiveness in terms of positive reported outcomes by patients.
Thanks, Johan. There have been studies demonstrating psychodrama's effectiveness of many kinds. They range from quantitative, non-randomized, to single group studies, to randomized group comparisons, to qualitative and mixed methods. Psychodrama bears similarities to the double chair technique from Gestalt therapy. They both use acting and modeling behavior to deeper understand oneself. Since psychodrama is usually practiced in a group setting, it requires a level of vulnerability and engagement in the process. Those with lower ego strength and higher resistance to therapy likely won't be as receptive. Unlike person-centered therapy and Gestalt, psychodrama is not as deeply egocentric, and Moreno even claimed his modality was supposed to counteract narcissistic defenses. Instead, it focuses on getting outside of your own head and using fiction to create awareness. For that reason, psychodrama can be used for any population which can appreciate the value of fiction, stories, drama, and/or theater. A vast array of cultures uses stories, and therefore psychodrama is indeed an appropriate approach for a diverse population. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, stay dramatic.